playing for the American League Championship. I don't believe it. It just continues.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
Oh, drives one. Right field. Did he do it? He did. Are you kidding me? Let's
go. Just when it felt like the wall had been knocked down, we're back to a crawl. The hot stove isn't so hot right now, but it's just a matter of time. As we all know, FSS Plus Podcast Future Star Series with Joe Doyle. I'm Jason Churchill. Hey, let's talk about that today, Joe, a little bit. At the end of the show here, let's dig into how do we make this winter a little bit more engaging for fans? Because to be honest with you, like, we're hardcore baseball guys. It's been boring most of the time. I think you'd agree. And I think there's some meat on the bone, so to speak, in terms of, things the league can do and implement to make this a little bit more interesting and more fun, a little bit more consistent. I would think you have a couple of ideas for that later in the show. Am I right about that?
I generally have some takes.
He's got a grin on his face. Yes. So we'll do that. Before we get into that, though, I want to talk prospects. I enlisted your assistance in kind of gathering the top 12, I think we landed on prospects that have been traded so far. And the reason I wanted to do that is because, one, it's interesting. Anytime prospects get moved and farm systems change, it opens up an avenue for a conversation about those players, those farm systems, things like that. So check that out at futurestarseries.com. It's the top 12 prospects. The rankings are Joe's, and I pulled some quotes from Joe's trade write-up, the Juan Soto and Alex Verdugo trade write-ups on those players. But more prospects are going to get traded, this winter. I think we all, expect that. And there's a chance, Joe, that none of the players that are in the top 5 end up in the top 5. So I think that's a really interesting conversation. So what I want to do, we'll stay on the trend of 5 here. I want to talk about 5 teams out there that seem poised to make a significant trade from a farm system standpoint. Like, what players are untouchable, if any? What players most likely to be included in a significant deal? So I want to get to that as well. And I've picked out 5 teams, and I'm going to keep them secret until we get there. I'm not going to tell Joe what those teams are. I have not told Joe what those teams are. So we're going to get Joe's, kind of raw reaction to those farm systems and those team needs as we move forward. But you know what else I've been thinking about, Joe, is like we're time-wise, we're 7 weeks, 8 weeks, almost 8 weeks into the off season. So time wise, that's about, 60% of the way, 55% of the way. Spring training opens mid-February. So we got 6-7 weeks left. So we're a little past the halfway point, but in terms of deals, it seems like maybe we haven't hit halfway. We still have some significant free agents and things of that nature. But up to this point, I'm curious to get your take on who has had the best winter so far from a club standpoint. Who's really done the most? I mean, let's pull the Dodgers out of there because that's probably too easy. Adding Shohei Ohtani was enormous for them and opens up a lot of doors for them. Not that they didn't have any open doors for them with their ownership and their willingness and the revenues and things like that in there in LA. But who's had the best winter so far? Which team stands out to you at the top?
I think the one that stands out, like from the outset, without really giving it too much thought, I really like what the Royals have done. Mm-hmm. They've been probably the most active team on the market. I think they've signed 5 or 6 guys. The Royals have never been a team that has really needed to move the needle with a splash, but raising the floor with guys like Seth Lugo and Michael Wacha and, a Swiss Army knife like Chris Stratton and some help at the back of the bullpen with Will Smith, like that pitching staff and that bullpen was a disaster in 2023. I mean, injuries and just lack of talent in the bullpen was a huge issue. So I really like what they've done. I think that they've certainly raised the floor. And if you're a team that's playing in the AL Central, sometimes the floor is what gets it across the finish line.
Yeah, it really is. Those gets to me. And while I like that the Royals are doing this, Those additions to me sound like I think we're going to be talking about Michael Wacha in July. We're going to be talking about Hunter Renfroe in July. We're absolutely going to be talking about Will Smith. I would be absolutely shocked if at least two of those multi-year 1+1 contracts ended up on other teams. I'd be shocked if they didn't. I think Will Smith, if he's healthy, is pitching somewhere else in August other than Kansas City. Michael Wacha, 2-year deal, might be pitching somewhere else come August, but that doesn't change the efforts there. I like it too. How about Detroit, Joe? You get you get Mark Canha, you trade for Mark Canha, you sign Kenta Maeda, you add Andrew Chafin back. You've now signed Jack Flaherty to a 1-year deal. I like what Detroit's done there because there's some young talent on that team. We saw Spencer Torkelson last year really finally start to turn a corner. I think the two of us really like Riley Green out there in center field. There's some talent on that team. If they have any luck with their pitching injuries, Detroit could win that division.
Yeah. No, I actually, what you said about the Royals in terms of those guys moving, Detroit is the first team that comes to mind for me when you talk about moving guys, because for Detroit, if all things go well, Matt Manning, Casey Mize, Tarek Skubal, they've got arms that they would hope are eating up big innings in the second half of this 2024 season. And if that's the case, they may be able to move a Jack Flaherty who ends up being a strong forward, but they just have to kind of push out of the rotation. So I could see Flaherty being moved. I could see Kenta Maeda being moved. Although, I said back in October, Kenta Maeda and Hyunjin Ryu were two of my favorite free agents this winter. I just think there's immense value in what you're going to get for 10 to 14 million bucks for those guys. So I do think, like you said, or like I said, the AL Central is gettable, and the Guardians are in a weird spot with their offense, and it hasn't gotten any better. And the White Sox are clearly turning things over. Is this going to be Detroit's? Is this going to be Kansas City's? I think it's wide open. I do want to throw one other team into this mixer that I personally think has had a really good offseason. And the national narrative and those fans actually don't seem to agree. I think the Cardinals have had a great offseason. I totally understand.
The fans don't agree?
No.
What are Cardinals fans saying? I don't understand how they could not really wanting more is one thing, but if there's a team in the National League Central that shouldn't like what's going on now, I think Pittsburgh Pirates should do more. I think the Cincinnati Reds are doing some stuff. The Cubs, that's the fan base that should be a little on edge right now. They've done virtually nothing, and Cody Bellinger's hanging out there in free agency, and the Milwaukee Brewers are clearly tearing it down. The Cardinals fan base is a little upset or not impressed, so to speak.
Well, look at it this way. You signed the guy who gave up the most homers last year. You signed the guy that had the highest qualified ERA last year, and you signed Sonny Gray to a 3-year deal, and he's already 34 years old. Now, to me, I've watched Lance Lynn long enough to know that ain't going to happen again. That's not Lance Lynn. Yeah. And Kyle Gibson is regarded as one of the most respected, well-liked, hardest working guys in the business. I just don't see a way where he's going to get torched like he did again last year. And so if that's the case,
does this speak to maybe there being a disconnect between especially the casual fan, because we can't expect them to live and breathe this stuff like the hardcore fans do, but even some of the hardcore fans, there is, and you talked about it with the Royals, there is so much value to raising the floor. There's such an enormous difference between Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson's most likely outcome and your typical AAA starter that has to come up and cover 130 innings because you don't have anybody else. There's a remarkable difference. You could have preferred Shohei Ohtani or Yamamoto or Blake Snell. Totally understand that. You're not wrong. Or even Marcus Stroman for that matter. You're not wrong. But those guys are viable, valuable, major league quality starters. So you can pencil in for, with Gibson, that's 150 innings plus, right? With Lance Lynn, maybe it's a little touchier, a little more volatile. But there's a pretty big difference between those two guys moving into 2024 and your typical guy that you're going to pull up from the minors or some guy you might sign on a $1 million deal, right?
Shoot, this is they signed 440 innings for $50 million. They didn't have any pitching last year. They didn't have, you can speak to, one of the guys that they relied on most was Adam Wainwright, who was 10 strikeouts away from his milestone 4 months. The guy can't get anybody out. He's throwing 86 now, and I love Adam Wainwright. But all three of these guys are a better bet to be productive in 2024 than Adam Wainwright was in 2023. So there's value in the fact that you're going to get 420 to 450 innings out of these guys, and every single one of them has been through the thick of a playoff race. Like, you're not going to get Lance Lynn is not going to fold under the pressure. Kyle Gibson's not going to fold under the pressure. And Sonny Gray is a dog. Sonny Gray might, because of his age, and he might slow down a little bit towards the end of the year, but that was arguably the best pitcher in the American League for the first 3 months of the season.
In the Cy Young running, absolutely.
A Cy Young guy. So I think they've done really, really well. I think if you look at Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn from a career standpoint, or even from the sample of the last 3 years, you're getting a guy that's reliable. He's going to be a 4. He's going to give you a chance to win every night. The Cardinals scored runs last year. They just needed some more respectable innings. All three of these guys are going to be a better option than what Jack Flaherty provided last season.
Yeah, I like what the Cardinals have done. I mean, should they do more? Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe another bullpen arm or two, but we haven't really seen the bullpen market move a whole lot. One more team I'll throw out there before we dive into the meat and cheese of all of this. The Arizona Diamondbacks. You acquire Eugenio Suarez from Seattle for nothing you're going to miss for 2024. Solidifies third base. Yeah, he's a big strikeout guy, but in that place probably hits 30 home runs again. Plays really good defense. He's a really good culture guy. We saw that in Seattle. Then they sign Eduardo Rodriguez to $4.80. So now you have Merrill Kelly, Zach Gallen, and Eduardo Rodriguez at the top of that rotation. That's a pretty good 1, 2, 3 in whatever order you want to put that in. And you're going to beat a lot of teams with those three. You're not going to beat Garrett Cole 3 times in a row with that thing. But those top three, I mean, that was a big deal, I think, for Arizona to grab Rodriguez and kind of put him up there with those other two. They probably still have some bullpen holes, but, bringing back Gurriel Jr., I think Arizona's had a really good, productive offseason. Ignoring the money they spent. It doesn't matter how you do it. Look at that roster. It looks better. It looks better than it did a year ago, and they're probably not done. So I think Arizona probably belongs somewhere in that conversation as well. Obviously, the Yankees so far, I think, have done fairly well. If we just look at it from an addition standpoint, they've done well so far. Yeah, they need to do more pitching.
Yeah,
pitching. They've done nothing on the pitching.
They don't have any pitching. I listen, Juan Soto was always such a, not a layup, but like Juan Soto is the start. Like, that's the appetizer. Like, hey, we need a left-handed bat. Hey, we didn't score enough runs. Hey, we struck out way too much. Hey, we're not an athletic team. Juan Soto is always going to be the appetizer. That team needs 2 starters. That team needs 2 starters bad. And I think moving a guy like Michael King, who could have provided you that, and I don't think Drew Thorpe is more than 2 months away from making his big league debut. He's a good arm. Reports coming out of New York that they may lean on Will Warren to be their number 5. I like Will Warren. He's ranked very fondly in my top 10 Yankees prospects, but I mean, you're the New York.
That's not where the Yankees should be, right?
No,
that's not where the Yankees
Jordan
should
Montgomery should be a New York Yankee right now.
But it seems like if from Brian Cashman's standpoint, like just so far, and yeah, they need to do more things. I think they're probably 3 arms away from where they really need to be, and they're probably 3 prominent arms, 2 in the rotation, 1 in the bullpen. But when you look at what they've done so far, Soto and Verdugo solidifying and raising the ceiling, in Soto's case, in that lineup, on a team that was 25th in the league in runs scored a year ago. I didn't realize they were that bad until right this moment when I looked that up, Joe. That they needed offense a little more than I thought they did. So they got that done, and now it's pitching, and we'll see. But the Yankees have at least been interesting and active so far.
I will say they've been interesting. It is refreshing that the cliche annoying New York Yankees are back.
Yeah, they're not as annoying though. You know what I mean? They're not as annoying because it's like,
they're like they're like the mortal wound star, not the Death Star. Like, yeah, they're not going to kill you.
Okay,
but
okay, I like that.
It could. Yeah,
I'm also puzzled. I'm puzzled, by the way, why Toronto has been so silent to this point. I know they were in on Ohtani. They were probably waiting around for that. But you'd think they'd have some things lined up. They don't know who the third baseman is going to be. They appear to be short on a starting pitcher. We know they're short in the outfield, and we know they're short in the bullpen. It's a little weird that they haven't moved as well, but a lot of other teams haven't moved either. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on the show. Actually, let's do some of it right now. Like I said at the top, I asked for your assistance. Hey, Joe, I went to Slack and I went, hey, can you throw together like your top? I said 10. and you gave me more than 10. Rank the traded prospects, and I'll use that for a piece. And I did that. That's up at futurestarseries.com this morning, or Thursday morning is when I put that up. But more prospects are going to get moved than that. So I expect that list to be almost completely irrelevant. Most of those guys moving off that list once the off season's over. So here's what I did. I started thinking strategically, what are 5 clubs who are most likely to make a significant trade? And I'm kind of curious if that club in your mind has an untouchable, so to speak. No one's really truly untouchable, but an untouchable, so to speak. And with that club's farm system, which prospect is most likely to be involved in a significant deal? Let's start with the Dodgers right at the top, not to bore the daylights out of the other 29 fan bases, but we know they're in on Yamamoto. We know Ohtani's in the books. But even if they sign Yamamoto, they still may be involved in the trade market for pitching, including maybe Corbin Burns or Dylan Cease, or even a reliever like Devin Williams or Emmanuel Clase in Cleveland. So before you tell me which Dodgers prospect is the most likely to be involved in these talks and ultimately maybe get moved, untouchables are rare, but sometimes there's a guy like in Baltimore, that's probably Jackson Holiday. In San Diego, that's probably Ethan Salas. Sometimes there's a guy where it seems close to 100% they're not going anywhere, right? Do the Dodgers, number one, have that untouchable? And number two, who's the guy that probably has to go if they're acquiring a Dylan Cease or something of that nature?
Man, an untouchable with the Dodgers.
It seems no, but
It doesn't seem like it. I mean, the guy that I would point to as maybe that guy is Dalton Rushing, just because I think he's an interesting kind of a unicorn. Like he's a little bit like Nolan Gorman. I don't know where Dalton Rushing is going to play for the Dodgers, but they really, really like him. Other than that,
can he catch? Can he catch
No,
at all? Can he catch 60 games a year?
yes. I mean, he's got the arm for it, right?
Sure.
And the direction that Major League Baseball is moving, I think anybody with a strong throwing arm and a willingness to block the ball can catch, and he can do that.
Right.
So I kind of always default to yes, as long as you have the throwing arm. But in any case, like you're buying the bat here. It might be a 55 hit, 55 power, or 55
That doesn't
hit,
really
60
sound
power.
like any kind of an untouchable, right? They might prefer not to move him, but if the White Sox said Rushing has to be the best prospect here, the Dodgers aren't saying no, right?
Probably not. No, I mean,
and
you
is
think
he
you
the
know what's
most likely
crazy?
guy? Is he the guy? Is he the guy that if you're calling the Dodgers and you're talking about the farm system, is he the one guy that probably every team is bringing up first?
I don't think so. I would think that if you're calling the Dodgers, you're calling about an arm. Like I would think that teams are probably calling about Kyle Hurt first or River Ryan, just because they're interesting metrically. They've been through that system. They have a chance to start. They've got a plus carrying pitch. Like those would be the guys that I would think about. After that, you get into like the Gavin Stones of the world.
Mhm.
Like I think they still have to rely on Gavin Stone at least as things currently stand. We'll see if the offseason changes and Yamamoto Sweet State changes anything, but like they're still going to rely on Gavin Stone to give him innings this year, and you could see Nick Frasso as well. So like I would probably look at those metric arms that would be the first to go: the Kyle Hurts, the River Ryans, to a lesser extent maybe the Maddox Bruns types of the world who's farther away. So I think to answer your question, the guy most likely to be moved would be, for me at least, Kyle Hurt.
Okay. Interesting. And he's probably ready as early as this year, right? Like that's not a guy that's 4 years away. Yeah.
No, at least in some role.
Really interesting. And teams do tend to prefer that these days. So that's the Dodgers. The Texas Rangers, Joe. Jordan Montgomery's a free agent. Max Scherzer is going to be out until at least mid-season. That doesn't look great. Jacob deGrom's going to be out most or all of 2024. That doesn't look like a great situation. Right now, their projected rotation in some order is Nathan Eovaldi, Andrew Heaney, Dane Dunning, and John Gray. It's not terrible, but if you're the defending world champions and you want to win that division, you're going to have one, maybe two, and potentially even 3 competitive teams. You probably need someone else at the top there with Eovaldi and Gray, and Tyler Malley's situation. We'll find out, but it doesn't look like he's going to be available at least early in 2024. That's a late season kind of a thing, like Robbie Ray in Seattle.
At best.
Texas going to need something. They could sign Jordan Montgomery back. Blake Snell could be part of that conversation. It doesn't sound like Yamamoto is in the Rangers are in Yamamoto's mix and vice versa. So it looks like Texas might need to trade for starting pitching. And like when you look at their farm system, the first guy that comes to mind is a guy that finished last year at the big league level and performing, and that's Evan Carter. I'm not sure he's their best prospect, but he seems to be the most important one to them. Like he's probably as close to untouchable as it gets in Texas. Am I wrong?
Yeah, there's two. Like Evan Carter is not going anywhere. He's going to be their starting left fielder, and Wyatt Langford, without question, is not moving. I mean, that guy is showing. He's showing an assimilation to pro ball that is MVP-esque. Like he looks like a guy that can come up, hit 280, hit 35 bombs, steal 15 bags,
Play good defense,
play a pretty good left field. Yeah, like I remember during the 2023 draft, I was trying to find a comp for him, and it was actually really tough because he's got a weird set of tools, and it's an interesting swing. Like he looks like he could give you several seasons of, I believe it was the 2021 version of Tyler O'Neill, where he was like, a 5.5, 6 win player. He ran, he fielded, he threw, he hit for power. Like that's what Wyatt Langford is looking like right now. Those two are not going anywhere.
Yeah.
In terms of like,
so if you're
goes,
calling Texas, then yeah, who's the guy you're asking for? Who's the first guy you're like, yep, this. If you're the White Sox and we're trading you 2 years of Dylan Cease, who's like a number 2 starter, it's going to sit at the top of your rotation for 2 years. If Langford and Carter are off limits, who's the guy that has to be in this deal? And Joe, I'll just ask the question: if Carter and Langford are off limits, and the Rangers want to make this deal without trading any prominent players from their projected 26 man, can they even get it done?
Yeah, they actually can. Texas has a pretty damn good top 30 right now. It's come a long ways. Now, some of the guys that you expected to be in it, like Jack Leiter and such, they're not in it. Like they're probably relievers. Kamar Rocker, like probably a reliever at this point. But if you build a deal around Justin Foscue, and if they're willing to listen on Brock Porter and Dustin Harris, I mean, those are 3 really, really good bats. And specifically Foscue, like I look at that guy, and if Texas is calling another team and saying, hey, we need arms, we want to offer you Justin Foscue. He's been really, really good. He's up to AAA, more walks than strikeouts. He's got power. He can't run, but I mean, that's a potential 285, 290 hitter with, 15 to 20 homer.
And if he can play you any second base at all, there's extended value there because there's just not a lot of second basemen available out there.
Well, and where's he going to play? Like, I know that injuries are always a thing in Texas. Like, you got Seager, you got Semien, you got Young, you got who's the kid that everyone was talking about getting moved at? Ezekiel Duran. Like,
sure,
they got a lot of guys that could take at bats, and I think if you can move Foscue and package him with a guy like Dustin Harris, maybe Chicago wouldn't want that. Maybe Chicago would want something like Justin Foscue and Brock Porter. I don't know if they'd move Brock Porter, but those are 2 really talented guys who could make an impact in a future White Sox lineup, especially if you could get that. I say the White Sox wouldn't want Harris because I think they're kind of strapped on the, I think they're kind of done signing all the left-handed first basemen in the world.
We'll see, but yeah,
we'll see.
You should be right. We'll see.
I would think Foscue could be made available if an
Foscue and Porter, Joe. If you're telling me that Texas is trading Porter and Foscue for Dylan Cease, I'm thinking that's about right. About right.
Brock, you might need a lottery ticket,
and Justin Foscue being the 2 main guys in a deal for I that seems about right to me. Huh.
Well, Porter is like 2026, but it's still the best changeup I've seen in 6 or 7 years of watching and like scouting amateurs. It's a 7 changeup, and he can spin the ball too. So there is a breaking ball to come, and he's 6'5", 210. I mean, he looks like Justin Verlander on the mound. So yeah,
and he's mid 90s, mid 90s into the upper 90s, right? Like we're not talking about guys 90 and 92 with that other stuff. It's at least velocity, and we'll see how the rest of that the fastball value plays out. And he's just getting started. What's he, 20 years old, maybe?
I don't know. He might be 19.
Fourth rounder in 2022. So he's got a little ways to go, at least a couple of years to get to the big league. But that seems that kind of value, that seems to make sense for Dylan Cease. Interesting in Texas, but I do feel like at least one of those guys is going to have to go if they're going to make a deal for an impact starting pitcher. Let's move to the Cubs. The Cubs are an interesting conversation because they're the two guys that stand out most. When you say, hey, name two prospects in the Cubs system, the two guys I think of, Pete Crow Armstrong and Cade Horton, those are the first two guys. And Pete Crow Armstrong is their center fielder on opening day. They can't really trade Pete Crow Armstrong, for example, for 1 year of Corbin Burns or 2 years of Dylan Cease. So if you're the Cubs and you're calling and talking about multiple years of a starting pitcher, if you're talking to Seattle about Logan Gilbert or Chicago about Dylan Cease, if it's not Pete Crow Armstrong, can you trade Cade Horton in a deal like that? Or do you try to avoid that too, even at the risk of not getting the guy you want if you're the Cubs?
Yeah, I'd be surprised for a team like the Cubs that has struggled to get pitching to have a full five filled out rotation for the last few years while they've still been trying to compete. I would be surprised if they moved Horton. Horton's got top of the rotation stuff. He's touched double A now, huge strikeouts, doesn't let guys on base. Like, I think Horton is probably going to make his big league debut in 2024. You know, maybe it's June or July, but so long as the Cubs are in it, I think they're gonna rely on him. Another guy that I would put in that same conversation, because I don't think PCA is going anywhere, is Matt Shaw. I just, you draft a guy 11th or 12th overall in I think that's where he was drafted, in one of the best drafts of the last 15 or 20 years.
13th.
And,
Yep.
yeah, and all he does is go to double A, hit 360, 15 steal. Like, Matt Shaw could be their second baseman as soon as June or July as well. So I think he's probably off the board. The rest of them, though, not in love with the Cubs system, and I think a lot of these guys could get moved.
So other than PCA, other than Cade Horton, other than Matt Shaw, who's the one guy other teams are going to, or maybe there's two of them, because maybe there's not one guy that stands out, that you probably insist?
I mean, I don't know if it's an insist. I think if you look at the history of just how trades are made in the winter, it's the minor league catcher with hittable upside that I think is kind of the guy that people would go to. So Moises Ballesteros would probably be the guy that does get moved. Like, he's still only 20 years old. I think he only made it to, I think he actually touched double A last year.
He did. Yep.
And he hit like almost 300 with last, I think he had 12 home runs, 13, something like that. So he can hit for power. He can hit for average. He's young. He's flying through the system. There's a little bit of like Alejandro Kirk in not the body, but like the tool set. And I think, he can throw. Like, that's the type of guy that I just see getting moved more often than not during the winter. So I think he'd be one of the first guys that people would ask for.
Yeah, 20 years old. He'll be 21 in actually just turned 20 years old. Left-handed bat. He's not big. What's he, 5'9" or 5'7", 200, something like that. But that sure seems like catcher to me. Some power. And you were right. You almost nailed the numbers. He hit, including his 5 games in Tennessee. He hit 14 home runs and hit about 275 for the season. So with some OBP, like, this is a guy who walked 63 times and struck out 78. This is a guy who puts the ball in play and hits the ball hard. That's an interesting guy. That's a really interesting guy for the Cubs. Especially if I'm the White Sox here and I'm making a trade with the crosstown team, if I can get a long-term guy that can catch at least some for me in the future, that's a good guy to lead with. Interesting. The Cubs need to do something. Like we talked at the top, the Cubs fans, man, they're getting antsy. Like, they're sitting around, they're waiting. Cody Bellinger's hanging out there. They didn't get Ohtani. It doesn't look like Yamamoto has the Cubs in his range. Like, he's considering them. Like, what in the world are the Cubs? And they weren't a bad team last year. They kind of need that extra kick, and it hasn't happened. And they're willing to spend. We've seen that. So going to be interesting to see what they do. Baltimore has a slew of young players, Joe.
This one is like almost easier.
It is, but because there's no wrong answer, right? Like we know Gunnar Henderson's not going anywhere. We know Adley Rutschman's not going anywhere. Jordan Westberg graduated from prospect status, but he could probably be included in this from a trade standpoint. But we're talking about Colton Cowser, Heston Kjerstad, Joey Ortiz, Kobe Mayo, and others. But do they have an untouchable? First of all, Jackson Holliday is the one guy. Is there an additional kind of sort of untouchable in their farm system, or is just about everyone else in play if Baltimore is getting the right pitcher back?
I think it would depend on who the player is that's coming back. Like if we're talking about Dylan Cease, if we're talking about Logan Gilbert, maybe this guy comes in play, but Samuel Basallo or I think it might be Basayo.
Mhm.
He's going to be their second ranked prospect for me. Left-handed, 6'3". I think he got to high A last year. I could be wrong. No, he actually touched double A last year. 19 years old, massive power. He can hit a little bit, and it's the same type of thing. Like it's a massive, huge arm, huge power, better frame than Ballesteros, and he can hit a little bit too. So, I think it would take a pretty special arm to come back when you're trading a 19-year-old, 6'3" left-handed hitting catcher that played at double A with a double plus arm and double plus power. I could care less that Adley Rutschman is behind the plate for the Baltimore
Sure.
Orioles.
Sure.
Buster Posey moved out. Joe Mauer moved out. Like these
Mhm.
guys move out away from the plate once they hit, 29, 30 years old. That those days are going to come. Um, if you think Basayo could catch for you as a 24, 25-year-old 4 years from now for 60 or 70 games and get Adley off of his feet, you're doing it.
You're gonna do
So
it. Mhm.
I just don't think he could. I have a hard time seeing Mike Elias move those tools.
So let's think about this let's stay with Baltimore, but in terms of their trade partner, let's think about this from a little bit of two different perspectives. If you're Seattle, because you mentioned Logan Gilbert there, if you're Seattle, you need hitters. Okay. And I'm not talking about let's create a fair package. I'm talking about the difference in the want. Like Seattle's going to want guys that either have proven they can hit at the big league level or that they really truly believe in big time. Like the probability is really high. There's upside there as well. And he's going to hit the ground running in 2024. If you're the White Sox, you might be more likely to ask for, a guy like Basayo or Mac Horvath or something along those lines. Something that's not
God, I
necessarily
love
going to be
Mac
ready
Horvath.
for. I know this might be the player, Joe, you and I, Mac Horvath might be the player you and I agree on the most. In all of our conversations, it seems like that's the guy we're all over. But yeah, like if you're the White Sox, you might not sit around and say, no, we need a guy who's going to help us in 2020 because you're not going to be good in 2024. You're really thinking about 2025, 2026, 2027. Seattle, just for example, is not thinking about it that way. They're going to want guys who can help them now. They're going to be thinking about Kauser and Mayo and Norby and guys of that nature that are ready to come up and help you win right now. That puts Baltimore in a really fun situation, at least from where I sit, because who knows which route, they're going to go when they go acquire a pitcher, but the package is going to look different depending on the team they make it with.
Yeah, Baltimore. You kind of look back at like the comments that Jerry Dipoto said about wanting to win 54% of your games. Well, having a farm system that looks like this and having the roster with the
That's how you do
control,
it.
this is how you do it. I mean, Baltimore is set up to win 56% of their games for the next 8 to 10 years. But at the same time, it's like you're likely never going to get over the hump with dreaming on Dean Kramer or Grayson Rodriguez to be, one of the top 5 pitchers in the game. It could happen, especially with Grayson.
Sure.
But I think dreaming on that in a playoff series is too rich. So, Baltimore and Chicago line up very, very well for a trade. Baltimore and Seattle line up very well for a trade. And depending on the arm that comes back, like you could throw out a couple ideas. Like if it's Dylan Cease, then I think, you're probably talking about Kobe Mayo and Enrique Bradfield type of a package. If you're talking about Bryce Miller, Bryce Miller, I've said it before, Bryce Miller for Heston Kjerstad makes a little bit of sense. But if you're talking about Logan Gilbert, I mean, you're probably talking about, depending on how urgent Seattle wants those bats, you're probably talking about like Kobe Mayo and Heston Kjerstad coming back to Seattle for something like that. And you might even need to throw in a lower level piece, hard throwing reliever type for that type of deal. So it's nice that they have such a rich farm system that they can really entertain any and all of these options.
Right. That's fascinating. It's got to be fun there for Mike in Baltimore. Think about all he's got and the opportunity. Even though they're not going to spend a bunch of money, the fact that he can go out and do just about anything he really truly wants to do that kind of fits his ball club, because that farm system is deep. I mean, you go down into the 10s and the 20s and find really interesting near big league ready players in that Orioles system.
I mean, Judd Fabian, like
Yeah,
Judd Fabian is
Cade Povich on the
fast.
mound. If you want a guy who might be able to help you in 24 on the mound, Cade Povich is a guy.
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah,
mean, shoot, if you believe DL Hall can start, you might value him more than the Baltimore Orioles right now.
That's true.
So
That's true.
shoot.
Can you mentioned Mayo there? Can he play third for a couple of years? Can he play third?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think he can play third quite well. I just, he's really, really big, and that's always kind of been the thing on him. It's like, well, when's he going to move
6'5",
first? But
230, right? Something like that.
yeah, I mean, there's look, Eugenio Suarez played Gold Glove defense at third this year. What was he, 6'2", 220? I mean, 6'2", 218. Like, he was a big boy.
Yeah.
So you can do it late into your career, and he's always been like that 5-star blue chip varsity quarterback that can really move. So I guess you're kind of betting against him with cliches more than what the film shows.
Right. Sure.
Which is fair in scouting.
So that's Baltimore. That's going to be fascinating to see what they do. It's too bad they can't spend on one guy, because then they could add 2 impact starting pitchers to that. Like if Sonny Gray was in Baltimore right now and we were talking about Dylan Cease or Logan Gilbert, that all of a sudden that Orioles team looks like not just the favorite in the American League East, but the heavy favorite in the American League East with a rotation like that. So it's interesting to see.
I would actually argue that they might be the World Series favorite until the Dodgers do something else. Like, the Dodgers have a great team, but they don't have a shortstop. They have question marks in the outfield with some of the younger players that just took a really long time to develop. Sure. And they certainly don't have the pitching staff that would warrant being called World Series favorites right now. I would stack up Baltimore with Atlanta if you gave them 2 arms.
They got work to do. Dodgers certainly have work to do. Like the Yankees have work. Most teams have work to do. But if we're talking about the 2 number 2 type starters out of that rotation in Baltimore, I'm not happy about that. If I'm Brian Cashman, if I let that happen, if I'm Brian Cashman, I'm firing myself. All right, let's move on to Seattle. The farm is maturing. It's not a great system at this point. They don't have elite names at the top in the upper minors, especially, but there is some depth. Like I said, it is maturing. And in the majors, they have significant needs that it doesn't appear they're going to be able to fully satisfy through free agency. Even if they're able to sign 1 bat, it seems like that's probably the maximum. And they need 1 or 2 more. So it does feel like a trade is necessary for Jerry Dipoto in Seattle. I think their top guys, Cole Emerson. Some think it's Cole Young. Harry Ford is in that mix as well. Is there an untouchable there for you, Joe? For me, there's not. But it makes it's really difficult to trade Colt Emerson for me right now, because I think you'd be selling low on a guy like that. But is there an untouchable? And what's the guy, if Seattle's trying to trade for a hitter in particular, what's the guy other teams are probably gonna focus in on and kind of hone in on most from that farm system?
So to answer the first part of the question, I'm kind of with you. I think Seattle, in most situations, they would hang up the phone if Colt Emerson was a requirement. I also think, unless there's something that we don't know at this time, just hearing the gushing coming out of that front office, I don't think Felny and Celestin is on the market for anybody. I would be very surprised if they sold him.
He could be their number 1 prospect in 6 months.
Yeah, by July. Yeah, exactly. 6 months.
Yeah.
So I don't think Emerson or Celestin are going to go anywhere. I tend to think the guy that people are going to ask about the most is probably Laz Montez. Just, talking about a 19-year-old. How old is he now? Is he 20? Is he 19?
13.
God, they're all babies.
It like, on one hand, it feels like some of these guys have been around forever. And then on the other hand, it's like you look them up and Laz Montez just turned 19 years old in late October. It's crazy. Yeah.
So it's
huge
like,
left-handed power, no defensive value whatsoever, even though the Mariners will lie to you and tell you there is. This is a bat.
The internet.
This is a bat. This is a bat only. But a guy who, to be honest with you, Joe, had a surprising season for me. Started off in the rookie league, but went to Modesto, where the average pitcher was almost 4 years older than he was in the Cal League in his 150 plate appearances there, and he looked really good. He really did. So he's a really interesting prospect to think about if you're looking at Seattle's farm system right now.
Single most surprising minor league season of anybody in the entire league for me. I don't want to say I'd written him off, because he was 17 in the DSL, and
just weren't expecting this at this point. Yeah.
Well, shoot. I mean, he was a kid that was seeing 85 to 87 in the DSL on the hot nights.
And still struck out 75 times in 220 plate
30,
appearances. Yeah.
34% strikeout, right? Like that. When does that player blossom into, especially at 6'5", 230, right? Like when does that player blossom into something that they weren't in the DSL? But yeah, he comes up to Modesto. He probably sees high A this year. And if he can keep those strikeouts down and just kind of let the raw power flash, because it's every bit of an 8 in terms of raw power. Maybe he turns into a middle of the order bat. He is still, I would still consider him closer to a lottery ticket than a top prospect. But I do think that he had showed enough last year that he would be one of the first asks. The guy that I think Seattle would be open to and willing to headline a deal with, if you want to call it headline, is Gabby Gonzalez. 5'10", what is he? Probably 180, 5'10", 180.
I think he's listed there, but he's closer to 200 pounds. Stand next to that dude. Like he's filling out. Average left fielder, decent arm, not a great arm, can't play center. Probably above
but he can really
average,
hit.
Plus power. He can hit though. Yeah,
he can really hit, and I think the league has kind of shifted the power projection up on him. I still personally don't see it in the numbers. I think probably he's more of a 5+ power guy. But there's a real chance that I've called him the right-handed version of Cole Calhoun since he was entered into the system. Like that's just what he looks like to me. And I think there's a decent chance that happens. So, but you look at Seattle, you look at, they've got Gabriel Gonzalez. They've got guys like Johnny Farmello coming up. Finding outfielders is not a difficult task for any team in any way, shape, or form. So if you could, throw Gabriel Gonzalez in a deal with Bryce Miller to get the type of bat that you want for 2024 and beyond, I think he's probably the guy that they would prefer to move more than anybody.
Yeah. I got creative with a Gabriel Gonzalez trade a couple of months ago. I think you saw that where I made this multi-layered 3-team deal with the Dodgers and the Rays. I'm very proud of that, by the way. I was very proud of my creativity.
That was pretty good, man. Those 3-team deals are always bad. And that was, there was a universe where it makes sense.
Yeah. I bounced that off a lot of people, including the Dodgers and the Rays themselves. And they're like, I don't like this. And I was like, all right, what if I did this? And like, yeah, that makes a lot more sense for us. This is the kind of thing we believe in. And I was like, all right, I'm rolling with this. So I'm very proud of that. But Gabriel Gonzalez is really, he's not going to be 20 until January, and he finished the season in high A. He was very inconsistent there, but that is an interesting guy. I don't see an actual untouchable, but I think you're right. And I think this is what you were hitting on if you didn't say it, outright. It's really tough to see a scenario where Seattle, this winter anyway, trades Emerson or Cole Young. And Harry Ford might fall into that category too, not because he's just as valuable, not because he's not, but not because he's just as valuable, but because we go back to the conversations we were just having. If a guy might be able to catch, has all the tools to catch, can throw, and we know Ford's athletic, works counts, puts up, 260 batting averages, 350, 360, 370 OBPs in the minors. He's starting to mature. He's going to see AA this year. I think Harry Ford could be the third guy in that conversation where it's difficult to see Seattle trading Ford, although he's probably more likely than Cole Young or Colt Emerson at this point, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think the thing that complicates things with Harry is you look at Seattle, and I know this narrative has dominated the headlines, but with a team that is money strapped and Cal Raleigh getting into his pay years in the next 4 years, I think Seattle probably has to have a backup plan for 2026 behind the plate because they might have to move him. Cal Raleigh all of a sudden might be a $13 million catcher, and they don't want to carry that in 2026. Right. I think they need to have Harry Ford in the cards for that. So if you would have asked me in July before all this information came out, I would have said, oh, Harry Ford is probably the guy to go. I'm sure Cal Raleigh is going to be in a Mariners uniform for the next 6 or 7 years.
But maybe some resistance now.
Now, that checkbook, that payroll is adding up for 26, 27, 28, and they might need some controllable young talent.
Yeah, interesting. Disappointing if you're
certainly
Seattle fans. Obviously, we've experienced that having lived up here. So interesting. So there are 5 clubs with 5 farm systems to go make significant deals, and they're varying strengths and weaknesses in their farm system, varying needs. Texas needs pitching. Baltimore needs pitching. The Cubs need a little of everything. The Dodgers need pitching. Seattle needs offense.
Can I say one more thing on the Seattle front really quick before we move on?
Absolutely not.
This isn't a guy that you're going to find in the top 20 prospects on most Mariners boards, but I do think if a team was calling to Seattle to make a move, I think Darren Bowen would be a name that I think a lot of teams are going to ask for, at least as a second or a third piece in a deal. I just think there is so much, at least for model analytic metric teams, that Darren Bowen does, despite his rawness or greenness, that would make him a very, very popular ticket.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting kind of tertiary guy in a deal like that. Would see he's going to be 23, I think, in February, but I wouldn't take the age from like a raw standpoint because he hasn't pitched a ton. And when you get guys like that, you have to kind of ignore the age a little bit. 6'3", 185.
We've talked about it.
Yeah,
There's a difference between age and training age, and I think
Mm-hmm.
most people see Darren Bowen as like a 21-year-old training age. So
Right.
he's got a lot of still kind of track ahead of him.
Yeah, they have a lot of interesting arms in that 20 to 40 range in Seattle. It's gonna be interesting to see if any of them move into Double A with a chance to give the big league club anything. All right, so the winter, Joseph, has been a little bit boring. I gotta be honest with you. Like I was having fun in November because lots of speculation, lots of primary conversations. Like that was fun, but this winter so far has kind of been the baseball offseason equivalent of, I don't know, West Bell Road in Peoria in March, where you drive for you drive 45 miles an hour for 500 feet, you stop at a red light for 2 minutes. You drive 45 miles an hour for 500 feet, you stop at a red light. There just hasn't been a consistent string of like big news yet. And Christmas is a few days away, Joe. So I don't want to say this hurts the game per se, but I do think it's a missed opportunity for Major League Baseball to kind of dominate sports headlines with college football. It's, after the Heisman thing and the championship week, it's down. Like how many people are watching these bowl games? Not many. It's very regional if your team isn't there watching it. The NFL hasn't really peaked yet at this point, and the NBA tends to stagnate interest until the trade deadline. This is an opportunity for Major League Baseball to kind of capture the sports audience, and they're not doing it. What's the first thing or two that you would do if you were the commissioner of baseball, or that you would just like to see the league do to attack? I guarantee you we're going to disagree on this, but that's going to make it fun. What's the first thing you would do? And is there a second thing that you really believe needs to be implemented to make the offseason more fan friendly?
Well, I'm going to speak from a 10,000-foot sports view on my second point, and it's been mentioned a million times, but let's start with the first one. I think one thing the NFL does very, very well, and these are two different sports that demand two different types of attention. I understand that. The NFL's free agent signing period, I think, is tremendously exciting for the fans.
Except, hang on, let me stop you right there. There's no deadline for this, though.
No, but there's a delay, and it opens up at the same, this whole thing, like where the World Series ends on November 4th and free agency begins on November 9th or whatever.
So what you're saying is you'd wait a couple of
work.
weeks or a month or whatever until free agent signings can take place.
I'm thinking,
I don't hate that.
Just provide some sort of a window where in that window players can sign. Maybe we even contextualize this around the holidays. Maybe it is you can be part of the early signing period and sign with your team from November 15th through November 24th, 9 days. And then we shut it down from Thanksgiving through Christmas.
But why would you do that though? Why would you shut it down between Thanksgiving and Christmas? That's your biggest opportunity, because once Christmas comes, the college football starts to take center stage again. The NFL playoff races and then the NFL playoffs in January start to take center stage again. It seems like the opportunity is right there in that period, like Thanksgiving to Christmas.
Well, then maybe we make that the period. Maybe we take November off and things open up on November 28th and things close down on Christmas Eve. And then we shut it down through New Year's and let the bowl games happen. And then we open things back up on January 10th and go through spring training. The issue that Major League Baseball has right now is it's one of dominoes. Like, I don't understand how an entire marketplace can freeze because one team is waiting to see if a guy gets $700 million. I'm sorry, AJ Pollock, you're going to get $2 million. It doesn't matter what Shohei Ohtani gets. Like, I guess my issue is there's so much between November 4th and the time that Ohtani and Yamamoto sign, and this happens every winter with a different player. There's so much hearsay and rumors and reporting about that one player for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks that it just numbs the casual baseball fan
Yeah.
down to their nubbins. And I
Because
think
it's
that
the
needs to
report, Joe.
change.
It's the whole, hey, the Cleveland Indians are fielding calls about Josh Naylor sort of a thing, and they attach like 3 teams to it. And it's like, that's a nothing burger. That's an
Nothing.
absolute huge nothing burger. Fans don't really truly care about that sort of thing. So I actually, because what I thought you were going to say was just to put it in a box and say you can sign from this date to this date and that's it. But what you're actually saying is maybe we just push it back and we kind of control this a little
Yeah.
more to take advantage of the timing. And I'm a lot more on board with that. And I think you can make November. So here's the thing: put November, late November, early December. Make the winter meetings longer and make it a fan fest. Open
I
up a
would love
bunch
that.
of stuff for fans to come to. When you put it in a place like Arizona, or you put it in a place like San Diego, or you put it in a place even Nashville, that's a place people in general will come from all over the country to visit. And you can almost make it like awarding the All-Star game to teams. Do you want to have the winter meetings in your city? Reward teams that are doing things the league wants them to do, although some of those things we don't necessarily
Make
agree
it,
with. It could be a
yeah.
huge thing for Major League Baseball.
Make it like the Super Bowl media days, but for fans. Put your general manager on a podium and get 800 people. I don't care how many. It's
What do
probably
fans
not
love
that
about
many, but
what do fans love about spring training? What is one of the things that fans
access.
absolutely? Yeah, bring players to Fan Fest. Major League Baseball
Yeah.
Fan Fest in early December in Nashville or wherever. People are going to come to get those autographs, to have their pictures taken with players, to watch instructional things, to watch Derek Jeter show up and say hello to, you know what I mean? Like this, that's a missed opportunity to me. Build a Fan Fest. That's what I want
Yeah.
to do.
The tough thing about this is you look at like last winter 2022, or maybe it was 2021, and it was like the aggressive teams like Texas scooped up Corey Seager and Marcus Semien so fast. But people forget that's so far aside from the norm.
Yeah.
The Carlos Correa signing at the end of January is the norm. That's what we have grown accustomed to. So, and I think that the cliche narrative or the whatever, whoever created the hot stove, it hasn't been hot in years.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because the internet and social media and the constant demand for leaks and rumors and news from maybe that has ruined it a little bit, but we need to change up the winter because it has just become so stagnant.
Yeah. Is there an effect, and I'm just, talking out my backside here a little bit. Is there a potential effect of, for the offseason to make the offseason better by moving the trade deadline during the season, moving it back? Is there a potential positive effect on that, or would that be negative?
When you say back, do you mean like into August?
Yeah, further into the season. Make it August 15, make it August, 31 or whatever, instead of, that first Monday, in August, or the last Monday in July, or whatever ruling.
I don't know. I mean, I don't there's not too many controllable players moved during the trade deadline these days anyways. It's so often just rentals that
But
I don't
wouldn't
know.
it be?
What
But
do you
might it
think?
be more? Might it be more if it was August 31? I mean, teams know they're out of it. Teams that's the battle, right? Like more teams
That's
are in
fair.
it
Yeah.
because of the extra wild cards. If you waited a whole month and there's only 30 games left in the season, and you can trade a player. Remember what the Angels did in dumping those players so they get under the luxury tax? I mean, it was brilliant. I love that.
That's
That
interesting.
was great. What
I
if
think
you could have
maybe
just traded those players?
I think you're onto something there with, as the league continues to add more playoff teams, you have to move the goalposts in terms of when teams are punting.
Mhm.
Maybe August 15th. I don't think they would move a full month out of the offset, but maybe August 15th, gets us to that 130, 125 game mark, and proof is in the pudding, writing on the walls.
Yeah. Let
I
me
will
just make
say,
sure. I don't know if it would have an off-season effect. I was just kind of thinking maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, in a
I think it
positive
would.
effect anyway. So
I think
what's
it
that
would.
scenario then? Because that was my instinct to think that it would have a positive effect on the off season. But what? Give me a for instance that, because you seem convinced that it would.
I don't know if it would. I don't think it would move. I don't think it would change the offseason that much. I do think it would be good for the game
Okay.
because I think it would,
Gotcha.
maybe bring 2 or 3 more teams into the
Right.
sell phase. But I still don't think they would move a lot of controllable assets because one thing that we haven't said is as you add playoff teams, more teams believe they're going to win the next year.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you don't see teams moving controllable talent a year prior than they have to.
Yeah.
But
And that
actually,
leaves
let me say the last thing here before we go. The second piece that I would do to improve the game, and this has been mentioned by everybody, baseball needs a payroll. It needs something. It needs either a payroll floor, it needs a payroll ceiling.
I'm all for a floor. I'm not for a payroll ceiling.
I just, you look at the numbers now, and the Mets were one thing,
Mhm.
but you start to look at now the delta between the top 5 payroll teams and the bottom 5 payroll teams. And that number is getting so egregiously wide that it's not the parity. I think parity will come with the game naturally. Look at the Diamondback. Like that's going to come with young players.
Mm.
The issue that I think baseball is going to run into is the bottom 10, bottom 12 payroll teams are going to have such a disadvantage every winter in selling tickets and getting fans excited for the next year when they
Yeah.
this is the first time that I can remember since like 2000 and probably 2004, 2005 that the mega market teams are the only teams in the news. It's Phillies, it's Rangers, it's Yankees, it's Mets, it's Dodgers, and that's it. And the Braves too for trades. But that's
Right.
it. And that's bad for baseball.
When you look at last year, how it ended, how the season ended, there were 8 teams, Joe, that, and I'm talking total payroll, not just 26 man. I'm talking 40 man expenses, player benefits, total payroll. There were 8 teams under $100 million. 8 teams. Now, those teams are pretty much who you would think. The A's, the Orioles, the Pirates, the Rays, the Guardians, the Royals, the Reds. There's an 8th team in there that doesn't belong, and that's the Washington Nationals. And I think that's the kind of ownership I have the biggest problem with at this point. Now, the Pirates have done this for years. The Rays have done this for years. The Orioles have done this for years, unfortunately. Not forever, but for years. The A's, obviously, that's a situation. And the Miami Marlins are just above that 100. They were just above that 100 million. We know what their ownership does. We know what their revenues are like. So I'm all for some sort of a floor. And what exactly that floor is isn't really the point here. What the floor does is the point, because I think this probably has the biggest effect of anything we maybe are talking about here in terms of the offseason. Because how much would the like if you set the median payroll at the end of year payroll, so it's a little different than beginning of year, but the end of year payroll, the average was $166 million. If you made $140 million the minimum for these teams to spend, look how active the A's would have to be. The Orioles would have to be. The Pirates would have to be. Those teams, the Pirates spent $76 million last year. To get to 140, they got to sign Blake Snell and Cody Bellinger and
But that's not what they would do. I watched enough Raiders off seasons to know that they would go give some terrible player $25 million just so they didn't have to deal with the next year. They're not going to commit to a top player for that long.
But if you're the Pirates and you have to spend $64 million to get to the minimum, how do you get there?
You know what it does? Like, it's not even about teams signing good players. It's not.
How about keep your players? How about keep your players and not let them always walk?
Exactly. It's about the ability for a team to be loyal to its fans, to keep its homegrown play. Everyone makes such an enormous deal in Major League Baseball about homegrown players. How are we going to succeed in a small market? We gotta do homegrown players, and then you ship them out after 4 years at 26 years old. It doesn't make any sense.
Let me see what you think about this before we get going. I've long been a proponent of Major League Baseball adopting the bird rights rule in the NBA from the NBA.
Yeah, sure.
It hits your taxable payroll different if you sign your own guy. And maybe there's some sort of reward that can go in there as well. Like you get a bump in your revenue sharing or something. I don't know. Like maybe that's outlandish. I don't know. But if the Marlins were to sign their guys instead of trading Pablo Lopez, instead of trading eventually Max Meyer, instead of probably ultimately trading Sandy Alcantara, even though they did extend him, instead of those players just leaving and going somewhere else, yeah, the benefit to keeping them should absolutely be there. And I see nothing wrong with doing sort of a bird right sort of thing.
Well, and it's just so good for this product, and I can't emphasize that enough. They are selling a product to advertisers and consumers and fans. The product would be improved if you could latch on to a player who's going to stay.
Yep.
This is about accountability and responsibility to the fan base that you are serving the product to. And I just think by setting that floor, you are guaranteeing your team, you are guaranteeing your fans that you have a responsibility to spend a certain amount of money on your team to make sure that it's the most competitive brand you can. And I think in this current situation, especially with the highest payrolls in the team exceeding now $300 million, it's unacceptable for an organization to be 30% of what the top team is and expect to sell to their fans this narrative and idea that they're going to compete.
The top 5 teams and then we'll move on. The top 5 teams in the league in 2023 averaged a $276 million payroll. The bottom 5 teams averaged a $79 million payroll. That's in 2023. If we go back, we'll go back to 2013. We'll go back 10 years. The difference between, we could look at this from a percentage standpoint, but the difference between the top 5 teams, $204 million average, the top 5 teams, the bottom 5 teams, 69 and change. The difference that you mentioned is growing greater and greater and greater every single year. And it stretches beyond the top 5 and the bottom 5. But and a lot of times we like to call them haves and have-nots, Joe. It's really the willings and the unwillings. We have a lot of people that own teams that shouldn't own teams because they're not there about baseball. They're there about franchise value and about selling.
You know what I like in this too, Jason? It's similar to the English Premier League in a way, right? There's no cap. Whatever the owner wants to spend, the owner can spend. They can spend outrageous amounts of money. But here's the major difference. The 30 teams in Major League Baseball are all sitting on top of $1.5 billion stadiums. And those English Premier Leagues, the bottom 10 teams, they play in high school stadiums that can fit 3,400 people. They don't have a financial and social obligation to make their team better. It's just, and there's relegation as well. So if every single team is playing in a $50,000 stadium, which I might remind you, in a lot of cases, is being publicly funded by taxes.
Most cases.
Then in most cases, you should have a responsibility as an owner to at least put your best foot forward, at least to a bare minimum standpoint, a floor to get that team into a competitive dream, a hope.
Yeah.
There's too many teams right now that just don't have hope, and that sucks for the sport.
It does. I look at teams like Oakland right now. That's the best example right now. Like what that owner has done with that team should not be allowed. So, all right. Anyway, really quick, in a minute or two, Joe's gonna depart. He's got some things to do, and frankly, he doesn't really like me all that much, which is fair.
Facts.
And we're going to replace you on this show for the rest of this show, Joe, with Jeremy Booth. Jeremy Booth is going to come in and talk baseball with us. You got a message for Big Jeremy on this? Should I send a message? Can I pass along some sort of note from Joe Doyle to Jeremy Booth when he walks in the door here?
Yeah, it shouldn't be tough for Jeremy, but bring hotter takes than me.
Oh, you preface that perfectly. shouldn't be tough.
If I know one thing about JB, I think he's going to bring the mic.
So hot takes, lots of substance there with Jeremy. So we'll talk to him in a minute. Joe, we'll talk next week. Happy holidays, dude. Look forward to talking next week. And I look forward to more conversations like this one, because we just made the game better. And I'm going to send this episode to the commissioner. We just changed the world. So
if there's one thing I know about Rob, it's that he probably has 80 minutes to listen to us.
Yes, he does. Absolutely. Thanks, Joe. We'll talk next week, man. That was the voice of Joe Doyle. Follow him on Twitter at Joe Doyle, MILB. That's Twitter or X. Find his work, including 2024 MLB draft boards and a mock draft, a really interesting mock draft at futurestarseries.com. All right, here we go. The first time on the show, it's the founder and CEO of Program 15, the president of baseball operations for the New Balance Future Star Series. Take another breath because we're not done. You've probably seen him on social media or in the Houston area on KHOU 11. He co-hosts the Extra Bases podcast with the great Jason Bristol. Nearly 2 decades as a player, coach, scout. It's Jeremy Booth's debut on the show. JB, you missed Joe Doyle. He sat in that chair, so to speak, for almost an hour. And I asked him at the end, you want to pass on a message to JB? And he said, no, but I got a challenge for him. And I said, fire away. And he said, you got to have hotter takes than I do. That's the message from Joe Doyle to Jeremy Booth.
I'm not sure what that means.
I'm not sure what it means either. What does that mean to you? Like, I don't mean hot takes. I don't think you meant hot takes like lame or in a negative fashion. I think it's just like be better than I was. I know it's gonna be difficult for you to achieve, but promise me you'll try. Promise me you'll try.
I promise you I will try. Let's get. If there's a challenge that's been issued by a young Joe Doyle, I'm going to step to the table.
Excellent. I want to get your thoughts on some things around the big leagues eventually, but in our visits here over the coming weeks. The winter's been slow. Ohtani, there's lots of stuff going on. But I think this is a really good time to do a couple of things here in the first episode you're joining us. One of them is to send folks to Amazon to find your book, JB, to be honest with you. Inside the Mind of a Scout, which, among other things, sheds a light on, and I quote from the book's description here, JB, the misconceptions about catching the eye of a scout. Can we start there today? Because that's really interesting to me. Can you give us kind of a general synopsis of that part of the book? Because this is a very popular question from 14, 15, 16-year-old ball players and their parents. How do they get noticed? How do they stand out to scouts? And this goes for college coaches too, because most of these kids are going to end up in college before they go to pro ball. And are there things that you see players doing that you advise them not to? What's missing from some of these kids' efforts as they try to get noticed?
You know, the worst thing, I'll start there, that you can do as a player is to try to keep up with the Joneses, right? You have to have an understanding of who you are. And you want to get the attention of an evaluator. College coaches, by the way, as a side note, are not scouts. They are college coaches, okay? And scouts will get really upset if they hear a college coach described as a scout. And scouts will get really upset if they're described as a scout. They're a college coach. Now, athleticism, confidence, comfort in your own skin, self-understanding, believe it or not, those things go further than just the raw tools. There's things you can develop over time, and you should. If you're 14, 15 years old and you're as good as you're ever going to be, it's over. Go play chess, go play soccer, go play MLB The Show. You know, you might do one of those games, right? There's a couple functions in that are interesting to me. But if you turn around and you're just worried about being noticed by scouts, you're going to get written off the list. And this is why. When you tell me you want to get noticed by a scout, I say get in line. So does everybody else, right? But if you're doing what people are think they need to do, throw as hard as they can, run as fast as they can, that doesn't mean anything outside of you can throw hard and run fast. Can you play the game? Can you put those things together in a way that works? Can you be a good teammate? Can you be a good person? So the list is kind of long, man. It's kind of long about how to catch the eye of an evaluator. But I promise you, athleticism, makeup, comfort in your own skin, confidence, those type of things, skills, bat to ball, whatever your position is, and tools, all kind of have this kind of rotating place. The tools are obvious. You know, tools get you noticed, skills get you paid.
What's one of the most misunderstood things? In fact, I'm just going to suggest one and see if you can add to it. The radar gun. I see kids chasing, they're 13, 14, 15 years old. And they're like, I'm at 83. I'm going to be at 85 soon. And their work goes into that radar gun. What do you have to say about stuff like that? I mean, obviously throwing hard matters, but is there something in addition to that? Like, is there some sort of missed opportunity there for those kids because again, these kids are developing without much help. They're really on their own, to some extent, up to a certain point, depending on where they are.
Yeah, they're being given development in labs, and the lab development. And I'm not talking about one place. I'm about a lot. These are labs. So even these travel ball organizations or developmental centers. I mean, they're labs. Right. I mean, we have things that we're doing where we're going to have some of these too, different focus, but we're going to have them too. And they're labs. That's what they are. Let's call it what they are. They're labs. Just because I have a different lab than you don't make it not a lab. Right. Still a lab. So I saw something today on X that was called a velo pen. And I've seen them before. I understand what they are. I mean, this isn't a new concept in today's baseball world. It's been around a while. And a velo pen is about moving as fast as you can, throwing as hard as you can, and who cares where it goes because you're trying to build up speed. Inevitably, that doesn't work. And the reason why that doesn't work is not because it doesn't build up speed, because it does, but because going as fast as you can to develop patterning, which is why they do it, without any kind of idea of controlling that patterning, sets your brain to a place it can't recover from. They talk about your body and they talk about motor skills and they talk about, there's some validity to that. But as far as performance, there isn't. When we decided to, when we came out of our mama, okay, we crawled first, right? Then once we got that down, we walked, okay? And then once we walked, we trotted. Couple steps. And then once we got the trot down, it was a little more of a run. And the next thing you know, we're sprinting. How come, if that's how our brains are naturally wired to process information, a step at a time, block A before B, do we go all the way to block Z when it comes to developing to work back to A? That's not how we're drawn up as human beings. I don't care. I mean, it's simple. It's like 2 + 2 still equals 4. It didn't all of a sudden start equaling 9. You know what I mean? So if that's the approach, then what I would say is doing things that way gets you written off. It doesn't get you committed. It doesn't get you signed. It doesn't get you on a draft list. It gets you eliminated. Don't do it that way. And the funny thing is the velocity pens I saw today on X were thrown by free agents. Now, last I checked, a free agent meant out of work.
Yep.
Means I don't got a job.
They're trying to get a job by lighting up the radar gun. Hey, I was 92, 93 last year. Now look, I'm throwing 97 now.
Great. Good for you. Eddie Bain said one time to a room full of scouts, he said, big league hitters velocity don't bother anybody. And I can tell you from experience, you can throw as hard as you wanted. I wasn't going to miss that. And I wasn't a big league hitter, but I wasn't going to miss it. Just didn't matter. I don't care. Throw as hard as you want. I'm going to hit that, right? So if that is what we're thinking and that's what we're training, and those other pens, pitch design pens and tunneling pens and chicken pens and Sean pens. There's all kinds of pens that they're throwing out there, and I don't know why we're doing it, but we're doing it. And I know why the purpose isn't there. So to the players that are out there trying to develop, you got to understand your body. There's a time to move fast. There's a time to build blocks. To me, the best way still will be develop the movement and then accelerate the movement. Develop the next movement and accelerate the movement. And you'll have somebody in who's never played this game competitively with any kind of success. Will say, that's not how you do it. And I'll say, then go get a helmet and grab a bat and figure it out yourself. And they won't do it. That's not my job. What do you mean? Why do I have to stand in the box? Because until you know what it means to move in that with dexterity, speed, skill, strength, athleticism, cognitive function, and hand-eye coordination, probably want to stop talking about how to do it. Okay. Talk about different ways to grow pieces. But as far as that getting noticed on a scout is just how this started. The player development on their own. You want to know yourself. You want to move through it. You want to be aggressive with it, and you want to build one step and then go to step 2. Get step 2 right, go to step 3. Get step 3 right, go to step 4. And you want more proof on it? I'm happy to give it to you. I'm glad you asked. When you look at Major League Baseball, do you start in the big leagues and end up in rookie ball, or do you start in rookie ball and end up in the big leagues? I'll wait.
I think both is possible. Let's ask Alec Manoah at this point. Both is
That's
possible.
a good point.
Point taken. Point
Yeah.
taken, however. Point taken. Yeah, that's obviously a very special case.
Oh boy.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean that's obviously a very, very, very special case.
Yeah.
So when we talk about these, I mean, Future Star Series is a series of events that some people will look in on and say, oh, it's a showcase. I never use that term because I don't see it that way. This is when people ask me, you know, what makes them different than some of these others. I tell them, you know, I don't sell them at all. They said, hey, I had a guy a couple of months back say, hey, sell me on, you know, and I was like, well, let me just tell a story. And I tell them of a scout day in Georgia in February.
Yep.
And it was my second event, first trip, second event since signing on with you guys. Right. So here I am. I don't know anything about how these events work. I've seen other outfits events, never seen a Future Star. And I see one in Carolina and we're down in Georgia and we're about to leave. We're in the FSS mobile ready to go. And you tell our driver, hey, hold up, stop right here. And you get out the car and you give this 16-year-old, 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", projectable flame-throwing lefty. You walk up to him and hand him your phone. And on the other end of that phone is the head coach of an elite college program. I tell people that story, JB. I tell people that story because I was about to ask you, and the reason why that popped into my head, I was about to ask you, how do these kids know who to trust? But I think you answered that question just a couple of minutes ago. The people that are running these outfits, the people that you're supposed to be listening to, where are they from? What have they done? What was their last position? What makes them qualified to explain to you what your development path should look like and who to trust? That's what I tell people. That's the story I tell people, and that's how I differentiate Future Star Series from really anything else. And I got a lot of from that. It's quite interesting, but it's also really interesting to hear you talk about what not to do. I think that might be most important than what you're doing. It's almost like a process of elimination here. And, you know, some of these kids are 13, 14, 15 years old and their parents don't really know, you know, what to do unless they're former players themselves or scouts or coaches, or unless that's where they came from and unless that's what they've done over the course of their careers. There's an event. There's a Future Star Series event, NorCal. What's the other scout day in Stockton? Game Prep Baseball Academy in Stockton on the 30th. If you were telling people why these events matter for those kids, and it's what classes 24 to 28 they're open to. If you were just to put in a couple of sentences, words, why those events matter for your kid that's trying to get better, trying to ultimately get seen, get noticed, put themselves in a better position, but mostly get better on the field. What would you tell a parent or even a player about a scout day? Because combines are a little different. Open IDs are a little different. They're just getting tested. But a scout day is a little different. It's a little bit more involved. Why are those events important? So,
I mean, the scout days are involved because they run with our partner organizations, and that means that I don't want to say I'm more invested because that's kind of, it's tough because I get to see those kids so many more times, right? And I'm invested in their growth in a different way. It doesn't mean that I'm not invested in the growth of the players from the combines, come to the open IDs, regional directors, the different pathways in. But it does mean that with the scout days, with the organizations, you have a different opportunity to get to know them, and you see them over time. You know, NorCal and Game Prep been here for 7 years now. Mm-hmm. They've been here a long time. And so we've seen these kids come through and grow up and mature and move on, you know, and sometimes they've had classes that haven't been a fit for what we do, and they know it, and they move on and they take them different places, and we get the best kids from that class instead of the entire class because, you know, NorCal especially has tried to make this, of the two we're talking about, and Granado with game prep, I can't say that. Granado with game prep's on our staff. Like, he's great, and I played against Anthony. But when it comes to Rob and Tony and NorCal, what they're doing is they're trying to make sure that we're part of everything the best way we can with the best kids that they have. And look, we've grown quite a bit, right? So not only do you have the development, not only do you have some feedback, some guidance seen by Major League Scouts, rather, now that information obviously is going to go different places, right? When you have those asset points for the other events that are out there besides us, we now have a voice. And we can send them other places and keep them in a system as opposed to turning kids over and families to defend for themselves. Now, again, that also doesn't mean the travel organizations are doing that. Many are. The ones we work with are not. NorCal and Game Prep are equipped, but they come to us constantly and ask our opinions and ask our help. And it's more of a developmental, pro-level access point that allows things to trickle down when it doesn't work at the pro level. It's true partnerships and relationships, and the scout days have a different feel than the combines.
Yeah, they definitely do. Those are fun. Georgia was fun. I still think about it. That was way back in February, like 8 months ago, 9 months ago, 10 months ago. I still think about how. Yeah, I still think about in February. Yeah, I still think about how fun it was to sit there and watch those players and to watch the staff work with those players and holler out at the second baseman to keep his to keep his backside down. Little things like that was a lot of fun. All right, so like I said at the top, as we visit on episodes of the FSS Plus podcast here with you, we're going to ask about Shohei Ohtani. We're going to ask about the Astros pitching staff. We're going to ask about whether the Yankees hitting coach has a clue. We're going to ask about things like that. Not today. One thing that's come up in conversation now, like here's the way I think about Jeremy Booth, just to tell everybody out there, maybe even to tell you, you've been a part of 3 teams scouting departments? Is it 3? You've been in draft rooms. Your circle includes, some of the best evaluators, coaches, executives the game has seen recently and maybe ever to some extent. That's the circle. That's what's fun about this conversation for me. Some are still in front offices. It's what they do. The relationship with the Players Association is strong. This is a constant conversation in your world. But I want to talk a little bit about a trend, if you want to call it that, give or take the last 10, 20 years. You correct me if that's way off, in Major League Baseball, where scouting and maybe even development in Major League Baseball, things have shifted a little bit, and not for the better, maybe for the cheaper, but not for the better. And I'm wondering from where you sit, where does the league stand, and what's missing, and at what level is it missing, and are there any signs it's heading back in the other direction? Because I don't think this is something fans ever really see and feel, JB. Like, we just see, we're moving toward data, and every year a team wins the World Series, and it's like, well, do they embrace data? And it's like, well, yes, cool, data, yay, championship, here's a trophy. And I don't think the casual fan, even the hardcore fan, is really exposed to these kinds of conversations. What is missing? What is not going on that used to be, that really should still be, to advance how these clubs in Major League Baseball are evaluating talent, particularly at the amateur level, high school, college, and then teaching them, developing them through the minor leagues into the big leagues. Where would you start in that conversation?
I think we're headed back towards a balanced approach. I don't think anybody from the beginning has ever said that a balanced approach. Well, let me say another way. I don't think the baseball people, traditional baseball people, said a balanced approach wasn't necessary. I think it's very myopic and actually foolish to think otherwise. And I think that the industry, after 20 years of this, really, because that's really what it's been, it's about 20 years of this swing, I think they've realized that a balance is necessary. Now, Major League Baseball itself has all types. They have, bulls in a china shop. They have political people. They have authority-driven people. They have glory-driven people. And it's a very interesting network and balance to watch. I think I and we have been fortunate that we've been able to take hold of our position whatever that position means, as far as our relationships and our growth and our communication and our friends and whatever we do, and find ways to move the game forward that helps it get back to balance. If you had to ask me what the mark was on the game that we drove home through all the platforms, including the one in Houston with Jason Bristol. It was to drive home balance. It was to allow these guys to be recognized for things they had done. The game has realized they need these guys that can see it, and unfortunately, and teach it in ways that don't just come off a stat sheet. Unfortunately, most of those personnel have been pushed out of the game, or games moved on, and they haven't been trained another way. There's a million different ways to say it. I think all three of those are accurate, right? I think they're all accurate. So to bring those back, you have to find a workforce that thinks differently. And I think that Major League Baseball has looked at this as an opportunity, this position they're in right now with rule changes and everything else, to get away from bad, slow, boring baseball, get back to action, get back to production, get back to things that keep the fans happy. But to do that, you have to people that can teach it. You have to people that can understand it, people that can see the value beyond the exit velocity, beyond the metric and on Statcast and defensive range. I mean, you were on our conference calls, or you were in our org meetings all week. We talked about all that stuff. Well, it's not that that's not valuable, but we talked a lot about having to see things the other way and how the model was going to balance and what we were going to do as we go forward. And I think MLB, 30 different clubs, 30 different flavors, right? They're going to use different stuff. Butch Bacala used to say 31 flavors. Right?
It's fitting.
But with Major League Baseball, it's 30 flavors, and if we're the 31st, for example, with the player eval, I'm talking about. There's other groups that do things like, perfect game. I'll talk. I'm not afraid to talk about these guys. They watch us, and I got a text message tonight about how scared these guys are of us. And hey, there's a feud going on. For who? Like who? I do not care.
We don't talk about them.
I don't care.
We don't.
They literally never come up in our conversation about what we're going to do. We don't talk about their personnel. We don't talk about their people. We don't talk about their approach. We don't talk.
This is literally, JB, the first time it's come up in a conversation.
And I want to say this because I know they're going to watch this. So I want to say this. They're going to watch this. They watch the stuff with Jason, with Bristol, but they're going to watch this. Let me say this. And listen real close, because it's going to be good. It's going to be worth your time. I want to get it right. You don't matter to me. You're irrelevant in my world. I do not think about you when I wake up. I do not go to bed with you on my mind. I do not go through my day wondering what's going on in whatever office you have, of what person you've had on a boat or a yacht that's going to tweet about some kind. I don't think about any of that stuff. It doesn't matter to me. All I care about is the problems that come my way from being part of this stuff, the other stuff that's out there, because I got to fix them. So what's actually good for me? It's good for me that you guys are in business. It's good for me that you're doing your thing, because you gave me a purpose. You gave me a reason to go out and do it. And beyond that, I don't care. I don't care what events you have. I don't care who you play. I'm not worried about your yard. I don't. The fact that you're worried about mine says you're scared. And that's okay. Go ahead. I ain't worried about you.
I'm still not going to think about him, JB.
Yeah, it will not occur to me after this minute. And they don't do everything bad. There's things they do that are good, and
Sure.
There's stuff with other groups out there that good people work there. And
Sure, yeah.
good stuff that they do. I mean, it doesn't have to be this war over this dollar over this kid. I'm about the kid. I'm not about the dollar. I'm about the game. I'm not about the dollar. Be about the dollar all you want. Good for you. I don't need $9 billion to live. Knock yourself out. If that's what you want to do, and that's how you guys get over on people, and that's what the expression that you got, and that's how you feel, then go ahead. There's a lot of secrets you got behind your closed doors that nobody's talking about yet. Okay? So if I was you, I'd just focus on your lane, and I do what you do well, which is marketing and content, because it ain't baseball. It's marketing and content. Okay? Congratulations on having a good marketing, content, and user company. It's awesome. Okay, I'm gonna go back to worrying about baseball, the kids, and trying to help them get to the big leagues. And look, I'm not going to fight. It doesn't mean enough to fight to me with you. I'm going to keep doing what we're doing. We're going to keep moving ahead and impacting stuff. And whatever happens, happens. Just there's a space for all of us.
You mentioned our org meetings this week, JB. Before I flip this back to how major league clubs are.
Was that worth it?
No. I brought it up.
Was that worth it? It was at least worth it.
Yeah. Before I flip back to the whole point of this conversation, the org meetings we just came out of, I don't like meetings. I think you know that. I like meetings. I'm also at times disruptive in meetings. I think you would agree. I like to raise my hand and interject. Sometimes when it's not. I mean, yes, I get it. Yes, I'm a question asker. But I hate meetings. This week was different. But the way you tweeted about it on Thursday, and I retweeted about it, or you tweeted about it earlier in the week, and I retweeted it and quote tweeted it on Thursday. The plan for Future Star Series and everything it involves and everything that involves it is very, very much like what you were just talking about with players and how their development path. Run before you crawl doesn't make any sense. Big leagues before rookie league doesn't make any sense. And that's not how we're doing it either. And to be honest with you, I just live here as we're recording this, just live put two and two together in that manner in my head. So it's an interesting way to think about things because there's so much amateur baseball and there's so much, and it's not just college, it's not just high school, there's travel ball. And this really starts with kids that are a really young age. But getting back to to Major League Baseball, would you say, and you said it's headed back in that direction at some pace, whatever that pace is, it's starting to head back and maybe that's one or two or a handful of teams kind of leading the way and the others will eventually follow because it's just like the NFL. You find that West Coast offense that works so well for the 49ers, then there's all kinds of versions of it that start to spiral around the league for the next 30 years and everything's a hybrid. But where would you say the biggest disconnect is? Is it at the amateur level? Was it scouting players at the amateur level? Was it specifically high school, specifically college? Where was the biggest problem area from an evaluation standpoint where it's, like you mentioned, it's kind of starting to head back to where it needs to be? Where's the biggest disconnect there from a scouting standpoint?
The disconnect is
it literally just too much data, like relying on data?
No. I think the disconnect from the scouting standpoint is, well, you say reliance on data, and that could be one way to say it. I think the way to say it would be when analysts got in the front offices in an aggressive fashion, not because they were never there, because they were always there, but in an aggressive fashion. What you got was people who did not have the base, and they're going to hate me for saying this. It's the truth. They did not have the baseball feel to be able to subjectively understand it because they didn't have it and didn't have the library and couldn't understand what it meant to do it. It meant to them that nobody else really could either. And it was kind of like hocus pocus, and it was like a little bit of voodoo and whatever words we're going to use to describe something that people don't really understand that they're afraid of. And they didn't get it. And they didn't want people around who could do it because they would say things with baseball in the essence of the game and in the flow of the game and understanding what it was that the people who only had numbers were either threatened by or couldn't understand or a combination of both. Okay. And they didn't want to deal with that. So what they did was they went to an approach of, I understand the stock market. I understand that, Jeremy Booth's book, Inside the Mind of a Scout, was a bestseller in 11 categories. That I can quantify, right? I understand that some eyes are blessed by God. I understand these are things that are accepted truths that I can understand. Okay. And so when you look at those things and they're accepted truths, the question becomes, why am I not going with more of these things that give me an insight that tell me the way my mind works? And I'm not saying it's incorrect, but my mind works is going to get me the result instead of the voodoo hocus pocus over here that can't possibly be right on. Now, you compound now that scouting is the hardest thing to do in the game. Scouting's harder than hitting a baseball. You know why? Because it's not you controlling. You're relying on everything else for that player to get to the big leagues. The player, the people around him, the organization, the approach, health. That's hardest thing to do in the sport. And so in some ways, having as much data and information as you can to help that decision is a good idea. But you still need the other side of it. And so when you get to a place of that, I think we found an area where there's been enough sample size, to borrow the term, right? Where we understand that's not the only way to do it. It doesn't work.
Would you? I had somebody say this to me once. Would you categorize at any level the analyst, the data? I don't even want to say analyst. The folks that gather data and try to find inefficiencies. They try to find that next high leverage reliever that pops out of nowhere because you can get him for $1 million or a minor league deal. Guy that pops into mind is Austin Adams, who was traded to San Diego a few years back. Like, he popped for a year, and then and it's a role that's volatile in Major League Baseball. But is there something about his his spin efficiency or his breaking ball in general or something where you can get a lot more out of him than anybody's ever got before? Is that idea? Would it be fair to categorize that as just finding an inefficiency and trying to attack it the right way, versus scouting is more of a skill? And I'm not trying to denigrate the data part of it, but it sounds like skills are repeatable, right? Everything else, like relying, because some people's jobs are literally use data, use information, use statistical information about players, about the history players, about the age, about lefties, righties, college, high school, their experiences, what they did in the minors and certain leagues in the minors, trends, their age, things of that nature. Find something in all of that information that tells us there's an inefficiency here and that might be a good player for us to get. That doesn't seem like a repeatable skill to me. That seems like something everyone has, and it's essentially a choice for one organization to value certain things over another, value walks over hits, value getting on base over power at certain positions, valuing defense a little more. There are clubs out there. Seattle's one of them, JB. They play in the most difficult place to hit in all of Major League Baseball on a regular basis. Why are they throwing the Kyle Schwarber types out in right field every year? Like there's a lot of space to cover. It's just one of those things. Some clubs value defense more than others. Is that fair? Is that fair? Again, I'm not denigrating the data folks and the people that analyze from that kind of information, but scouting seems like a skill.
The fact that you got to say that you're not denigrating them for speaking the truth is a problem.
Because it kind of sounds like because I'm not. I would denigrate the process that weights that improperly. Yes. But
I don't think it. I think it's just that you're saying, listen, man. I mean, everybody's got the same information at this point. What you do with it's probably the skill. How you interpret it's the skill. But having that data, everybody's got it. Now, before everybody had it, the Houston Astros were ahead of everybody else in baseball with it. There's no question about it. And they had it, and they got it out there, and they got it done. And then everybody, rightfully so, tried to get on it. And that was the flex. How do we get on it? How do we find those inefficiencies? But we fell in love with, we as an industry, that was the only way to do it. You know what the new flex is now? Teaching guys how to locate that. Teaching guys how to pitch out of the strike zone. Teaching guys how to go east and west. Teaching guys how to hit that stuff.
The sarcasm is dripping, JB, because you called it the new thing.
That's a new flex. Which is why I talk about going back to the middle. So I don't think you have to qualify that. I think you nailed it. I think that's it. I think that what you do with that data is the skill. I think that's the human being, though. Mm-hmm. That's not the sheet, right? It's not the numbers. That's the human being. And a human being has to have some vision, some people skills, the ability to relate it to be able to make that execution happen. And by the way, talk about why that matters and how mechanically to do it that isn't part of artificial intelligence or anything else.
Has there been a point over the last several years where maybe I'm asking this question wrong? Maybe point singular wasn't the right way to put it. Have there been points in this kind of conversation over the years as baseball's grown, and some people attach this to Moneyball, like whether that's when it started or that was just the first time we took notice of it in that manner. That's kind of what I think. But has there been a point in the last, I don't know, 10 years or so where you've just kind of rolled your eyes really, really hard at the way a certain team or certain front offices or certain personnel tend to treat this process? Because it sounds like some clubs are much, much bigger offenders than others.
Well, I'll say it this way. I'll talk about Moneyball for a minute, because the Oakland A's, I grew up around David Forst, down the street, same age. Same area, like played most of my life. Eric Martins is a base coach there. Darren Bush is there. I know those guys. Kotze, I know those guys pretty well. And not to mention their scouting staff. And what I'll say is that the A's, for all they get blasted for Moneyball, they stopped drafting like that a couple years after they started.
Sure. Yeah.
People don't pay attention because they keep thinking Moneyball. Yeah. Now, for the A's at the big league level, regardless of what that product looks like right now, that makes a lot of sense, because they're not given the budget and they're not given the money to go compete. And if the Oakland fans are really being honest, they stopped coming out some time ago. Wasn't just last year or the year before. Even back in 2002, 3, 4, 5, they were not showing up like that. They showed up when they won, but they weren't showing up consistently, right? That's not that different than most cities. But in Oakland, that's a different dollar amount to it, right? So, that's just how that worked. Now, if I had to say, I won't pick on a team today. I'll say that I'm very interested to see how the Red Sox are going to look, because they have two of what I believe to be some of the worst hitting guys on the planet that they just hired. Okay. And I'm interested to see how that looks.
Are you telling me, JB, hang on a second. Are you telling me that hit strikes hard is not a perfect approach to teaching hitters how to hit? Is that what you're telling me right now?
I'm going to say this. I have a ton of respect for the guys over there. Obviously, we do stuff in their building. This is my personal opinion, which they all know I'm going to give. And they have their processes and they're welcome to them, and they got to do what they believe. But the entire American League East stood up and applauded when they hired Jason Ochart and Dylan Lawson. Now, if your opponents are standing up and applauding that you hired a couple of guys, I would take that as sarcasm. Okay. And I'm just, Dylan Lawson was the only guy in the history of Brian Cashman's tenure that he fired during the season.
That should say something.
Might want, and look, Jason Ochart, to me, while I haven't paid attention to what he does in the last few years, his track record or non-track record speaks for itself. These guys could be the most process-oriented dudes in the world. They don't listen. They think they got it all figured out. Their track record says otherwise. And that's the downfall. It's not so much they can't learn. It's not so much they have nothing to offer. That's not what I said.
Well, I'm telling you, JB, if Red Sox fans are listening to this, they cannot be happy. Traded Alex Verdugo, acquired Tyler O'Neill, hired two coaches that you're saying aren't going to help them.
Standing ovation.
And they haven't done anything else this winter. I know that there are a lot of other teams that haven't done anything, but the Yankees have done some things. The Baltimore Orioles, the Toronto Blue Jays, the Yankees, and the Tampa Bay Rays are already better than the Red Sox on the field. They're significantly better now because those other teams have either stood pat or gotten better. The Red Sox, if anything, have gone backwards. I'm not happy if I'm a Red Sox fan at this particular moment on a Friday afternoon when they're listening to this podcast.
It's not for me to I'll never go after anybody for doing what they think they need to do. Like, I'll pat you on the back and wish you luck with it. Those two dudes baffle me. They just do. And the fact that they're in the same place.
Well, the way around that, around those guys, JB, is for Boston to go out and spend a bunch of money on a bunch of established players and win that way. But they haven't done that. So I don't know. Maybe that's a sign that they're just trying to cut corners, because that's what they did with the Mookie Betts deal, is try to cut corners. And now we're one full cycle away from the Mookie Betts deal because they just traded Alex Verdugo. And they're nowhere better in any way.
I don't know what the process was. I don't know from the outside looking in, which is all we got. You have to look at what the thinking is, and you got to question it. And it's like it's all in Seattle is a good example of going down a certain pathway and saying that Jerry's gonna have the money to do what he needs to do, and all of a sudden it just magically disappears. Now, you question what the step 1 was for, and step 2 was for if you don't let him finish step 3. And I don't understand. And in Boston, if trading Mookie Betts was designed to get all this other stuff back and you've gone backwards, why would you keep doing the same thing? What's it been, 4 years?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like they're waiting for everything to pop. It's like they're in Hopeville, like some of the mid and small market clubs are. Hey, if everything goes right, we're going to be really good. But nothing's ever, that's not the way it works ever. Like we saw that in Seattle. You were in Seattle when they were kind of forced to do that for a few years before.
Kind of forced?
Well, I mean, they did sign Robinson Cano and they did sign Nelson Cruz, but they were still in hope mode because they were relying on Brad Miller and Dustin Ackley and all these guys to pop like all at the same time.
Don't do that. Don't bring that up. Don't bring it up.
Okay, they were in hope mode. Okay, and I'm not throwing Jack Sorensic under the bus here.
We had Cruz signed after we signed Cano. We had him signed, and ownership said no because he's coming off the PEDs.
And then you got him the next year.
Yeah, you're a different team.
Yeah,
it's a year later. You can't do that. You needed a right-handed power bat then. What are we, a half game out of the playoffs or a game out of the playoffs at the end? We lost in the last day, right? Yeah. So you can't do that at that point. I don't know. You're going to get me going down a road we don't want to go.
But we're going to do that at some point on this show. We're going to go down that road, and I want to talk about Jack some more because you spent quite a bit of time with Jack. Jack's a fun topic. Jack always treated me really well. Jack was a funny dude. I remember seeing him at Cheney Stadium at Tacoma. He was there to see Taijuan Walker and James Paxton. And I asked him what he thought of James Paxton. He was like, yeah, we obviously like him, And I was looking for a little more out of Jack at that point. And I think I think Tom Allison was there with him, who gave me a lot more than Jack ended up doing, but I totally get it. And I said, you like him, but like, do you love him? Is he going to be this like potential number 1 guy? And raw stuff wise, maybe he was that front line kind of top of the rotation type. And he's like, well, let me just say this. I love my wife. That's what Jack said in response to, do you love James Paxton? He said, well, so we'll go down that road at some point because Jack's a fun topic. JB, appreciate it. I know we run out of time here. We will talk about moves and trades and free agent signings and things like that. But I think going down the scouting and player development road with you is always going to be fascinating. I wanted to start off that way. So we'll chat soon. That's Jeremy Booth. How would you, like, if you had to have one thing, because at the top when I introduced you, there's 12 things. KHOU, there's Program 15, there's Future Star Series, it's former scout, 3 clubs. Like, I don't know, like Jeremy Booth, Future Star Series. That's the easiest way for me. I
just think of myself as a human being that gets up every day and busts his tail to be as good as he can be. And however somebody decides they're going to describe me, then let them do it. To me, it's eye of the beholder, and no answer is wrong. Even if you don't like me, there's probably some reason for it. You know what I mean? So, I'm good. I'm good with whatever you want.
Some reason for it. That's beautiful. So when I tag you in on social media that you joined us, it's going to be Jeremy Booth, human being.
Love it.
That's the way it's going to be. That's the way it's going to be. Appreciate it, JB. I know you got to run. We do this every week. We do this every week on FSS Plus Podcast, Future Star Series. Find Jeremy Booth. What the hell is your Twitter handling way? It's underscore
@ Jeremy Booth. It's right there.
@ Jeremy Booth. And you don't have to capitalize on X. You just toss in the letters and there it is. But you should be following him anyway because talk about hot takes. Whoo boy. And I mean that in a good way. Like, no holding back with Jeremy Booth. All right, we'll talk next week. Thanks to Joe Doyle. Thanks to Jeremy Booth. This has been the FSS Plus Podcast.
So just chill till the next episode. Falling back on that ass, what a hellified gangster lean.